Hi, welcome to the Oliver Fetter YouTube channel. Today I want to talk about my 2006 Ford van, and specifically I want to delve into some things I did to my transmission, which is the 4R75W. Now, the 4R75W is pretty much an analog of the 4R75E and the 4R70W, so this kind of applies to like all three of those, and then certain things I'm going to talk about like torque converters apply to like literally any automatic transmission ever made, so that's helpful. But this is the rig we're talking about, and recently I overhauled my transmission. The impetus for doing that was I have started my four-wheel drive conversion on this van. So in order to do that, you either need to get a four-wheel drive transmission, or the key difference between a two-wheel drive and a four-wheel drive 4R75W transmission is the output shaft. So instead of getting a different transmission, which was expensive, I chose to rebuild. Well, I didn't really have to, but I chose to replace the output shaft of this transmission, and to do that you have to pull everything out of the case anyways. So I went ahead and rebuilt the transmission, changed the output shaft, put my transfer case in, etc. So that's why I got in there. And while I was in there, I also decided to put in a shift kit from, why am I blanking? We'll come back to that. I put in a shift kit for the valve body, and then I've also put in a higher stall torque converter. And so today I wanted to kind of review those two aspects of what I did, and just for someone else's reference when they're also considering tearing into their transmission and or doing any kind of upgrades. All right, so I just completely blew my first take of this. I talked for the last half hour at least and didn't hit the record button. So I'm a little bit sad now. So you'll get the more concise version because now it's the second time trying to say it. So I've been experiencing two things I don't like after my rebuild and new parts I put in. And I wanted to share them because I think they're common enough that other people might try them and end up with the same kind of bad taste in their mouth after thinking it would actually be something positive for their car. Now, I'm going to preface this by sharing how I use my Ford van, because that's very important to how these modifications may affect you. This is my camper van / off-road rig. It is something that probably sees 95% of its time on the highway, 5% of its time off-road or on really rough roads or in like deep snow, muddy conditions. I do a fair bit of around town driving on it. It's probably an even split between highway and around town. And for the most part, it's my daily, it's a camper, and it's something to take long road trips in that end in spicy places. So when I set out to do my rebuild, there's like two things that kind of bother me after the fact, given how I drive. And we'll start with the torque converter first. So I replaced my original factory torque converter with a higher stall alternative. And if you've never had to replace your torque converter, you may not even know there are such things as different stall torque converters, nor what stall speed is. So we'll start with what stall speed is and go from there. Now, you will know it as the point at which your RPM needle stops moving when you accelerate from a dead stop or from a traffic light, or you're coasting at like 30 miles an hour, your RPMs are back at idle, and when you hit the gas, they bounce back up. That point that they raise to from idle is your stall speed. Now, all that is inside your torque converter, which is what couples your engine and your transmission and allows your engine to idle while you're not moving and nothing's engaged and you don't have to press a clutch pedal. That's your torque converter. And inside of it is fluid. It's full of transmission oil, and there's basically like an impeller, which is a bunch of fins, and then the case has a bunch of fins. And so the engine spins one half of the fins, and when the other half of the fins hit the same speed, that is called stall speed. So when your needle stops moving, the fins are coupled together more or less in your torque converter, and everything's moving the same speed. Until that, you would say your torque converter is slipping, and it does this intentionally. It's supposed to slip, and it gives you some torque multiplication, kind of, and that's exactly what it's supposed to do. So if you increase your stall speed, which is what I did, that means when you hit the gas, your needle now goes from idle to potentially much higher. And it's kind of a gradient. Now, and it depends on how much like horsepower you're putting to it. If you like go wide open throttle on my high stall torque converter, it'll go right to stall speed, which is about 2,500 on my van. And it'll sit there because it's fully engaged and everything's spinning. Now, if I like feather the throttle, leaving a traffic light or pulling out of my driveway or something like that, now instead of that being fully engaged, it's partially engaged. There's slippage occurring in there on purpose, and you won't necessarily hit that stall speed unless you hit the gas hard enough to get up to that stall speed, if that makes sense. So leaving a light, for instance, and just feathering it, I might only get to like, I don't know, 2,000 RPM or something. But instead of that being firmly engaged, like when your needle hits stall speed and you continue driving, it feels firm and like everything's linked up. But for me, now that it's higher, if I don't go all the way to stall speed, because it's absurd sometimes to rev your engine to 2,500 RPM to pull out of a parking spot, it's spongy. It's not fully connected. There's that slipping going on, and basically what the engine is doing isn't fully correlated to what your rear wheels are doing. So that's how that works. Now, in my case here, I switched to a higher stall because I had watched other YouTube videos on it, and I was kind of curious about it because when I went to buy a torque converter, I now saw that there were options that I didn't even know existed. I was like, oh, high stall or low stall. And what you read about high stalls is usually all the good things and only a few bad things. You usually read that you get more horsepower, that it puts your engine in its power band, that it lets you accelerate faster from a stop, and all those three things are absolutely true. And it totally does do that. And then in an off-road application, it also gives you more room to feather your throttle without your, low gear range being super touchy. If you are like going over bumps and your foot is shaking as you're going over the bumps and you're in like first gear low, your car could be like violently moving back and forth from your drivetrain response because of all the torque multiplication of being in low range. A higher stall torque converter fixes that if you're in low range frequently because it gives you more of that spongy zone to sop up your inconsistent pedal movements. Those are all the common good things you will hear, read, see, watch on YouTube that people will tell you. And almost all high stall torque converter videos are made by people who put them in and are stoked on them and are like, yes, it's so sick, my truck is so fast, and then they launch it and like that's the end of the video. Or it's like almost always just highway pulls is what you get when you search high stall torque converter. I know this because I looked and tried to find information on it earlier before I put it in my car. So I'm going to give you all the reasons you shouldn't put in a high stall torque converter based on my own experience and the way I drive. So based on the driving conditions I gave you, here's all the reasons not to put it in. Reason number one, it totally drives like shit. It turns your automatic transmission into like the spongiest, wettest, slowest dog of a car you've ever had if you're not trying to rev it all the way to stall. When I pull out, like turn onto a busy road quickly and I, give it some gas, that's great. It revs to 2,500, everything locks in, it stalls, and my van goes pretty quick. That's good. But now there's so many times, especially the way I tend to drive, there are a million ways that I need partial throttle. During my day, I like to accelerate slowly from a lot of situations. I like to feather it a lot of times. And in all those instances, I now get almost no response from the rest of the drivetrain. Like the engine does exactly what I want, and then just none of that is communicated because the torque converter is busy slipping because I'm at 2,000 RPM and not 2,500 or even lower. Sometimes I'm at 1,500 RPM just trying to do a chill pull out, and now my van is barely moving because that torque converter is slipping and not fully engaged yet. That's probably my biggest gripe, honestly, is the drive feel. And a lot of my driving is around Denver. It's daily driving, it's light to light, and having that spongy feeling all the time is horrible. I hate it. It's absolutely terrible. If you daily your car and you were thinking about a high stall, I'd recommend you forget it. It's terrible. Secondly, and potentially more importantly, but it's a little less direct feedback to you as the driver, is the fact that my fuel economy with a high stall torque converter sucks. It sucks so bad. And kind of two reasons for that. I mean, the first and obvious reason is you just increased your RPM range to get in your power band. Sounds great on paper, but the reality is your engine's just at a higher RPM all the time. All the time, all the time, all the time. And so that obviously being at a higher RPM, more revolutions per minute, more gasoline injected, you just get worse fuel economy. And it's a good thing sometimes, like on a highway, going up Floyd's Hill in Denver, where it's steep and normally my van struggles, it no longer struggles because I'm at a higher RPM. But all the times you're not trying to be at a higher RPM, like cruising around, between lights, etc., you're also now in that spongy zone I just described. So you kind of like lose. So for one, you're at a higher RPM when you're fully engaged, and that hurts your fuel economy. And I'm saying it's a lose-lose from a fuel economy perspective. So you're always at a higher RPM, that's a lose. And then when you're not at a higher RPM, aka you're kind of feathering it, like your torque converter's not fully engaged because it's so high and you just want to go kind of in between, you're now getting torque converter slip, which is inefficient. You're basically just like spinning oil and generating heat with like some of your horsepower instead of transferring it to your wheels at a lower RPM. And that kills your fuel economy too. And to kind of illustrate some numbers, unfortunately I went from a 33 to a 35-inch tire at the same time I did my transmission rebuild, so that muddies the waters a little bit on the fuel economy side, but I would expect going from a 33 to a 35 to give me, 1 to 2 mpg different and nothing more, and that's fine. But now, I used to get 17 on the highway, and I now get, maybe 14.5 or something like that. It's pretty atrocious, and then I would used to get about 14.5 or 15 around town, probably 14.5 right in there. And now, like mixed city driving, I get 13 on a good day, more like 12.5 or even 12 if you're like letting the van warm up for a long time because it's winter, things like that. So you can see that's like quite a few points in fuel economy, enough. And half of it is it hurts your wallet. Like this has a 32-ish gallon gas tank in it, and that's expensive to fill, and it now drains quicker. But then on a more kind of practical and useful side of things, besides just worrying about money, is that it actually decreases the range of your vehicle. So by putting in a higher stall torque converter, instead of being able to drive maybe 450 miles on a tank, I can now only drive probably like 375 if I'm lucky or something like that. That really bothers me, because on a long road trip, being able to drive further between stops is huge, and it makes your life easy and it makes your life nice, especially when you're alternating between being in the middle of nowhere and being somewhere. It's nice to know you're going to make it through nowhere and get back to the gas station in somewhere because you have X number of miles of range, and if your range goes down, that tends to squeeze those margins more. So between the fuel economy and the spongy feeling, I absolutely loathe my high stall torque converter, and I already ordered a lower stall torque converter to replace it with, and I'm going to make that replacement happen very soon, probably in the next month or whenever I can have time to do that swap out. It is unfortunate because now I have to pull the transmission again, but it's not so bad. Part 2 of this rant is about shift kits and valve bodies. So my van has about 300,000 miles on it, which means the transmission I rebuilt has about 300,000 miles on it. And I went with the Uber Complete Transmission Rebuild Kit, which was like seals, bearings, bushings, steel plates, frictions, the whole 9 yards. It doesn't provide you any of the drums, and it certainly doesn't provide you a single thing to help rebuild your valve body. And then I also got a shift kit from Fairbanks, it's whatever, the Fairbanks Performance Tow Haul Competition shift kit for like $200, and I put that in. And at the end of the day, all I ended up installing from that shift kit was really like 5 springs and like 1 billet, accumulator, and that's kind of it. And like some instructions, like it's incredible how much you pay for a shift kit for what you get. You get almost no real tangible parts to install out of it. It's very silly. As a quick aside, I tore down my transmission and I kind of ordered the super duper complete rebuild kit. And after tearing it down, I'm not mad because again, it had so many miles on it when I tore it down. But I feel like the better way to do it, instead of ordering everything you think you need and replacing it all, would be to tear it down and see what it needs and then replace based on that. And you can still be thorough and replace, all your bearings and all your bushings, etc. But like, for instance, I still had to replace my direct drum, which if you have a 4R75W, you will likely need to do that eventually too. They just egg out on their splines and they give you a clunk and it's no good. And then there's another drum or two you may want to replace. I also had to do my sun gear tangents. Those aren't included in the rebuild kit, so you still have to wait or go to your transmission supply shop and get those parts when it's all torn down, even though you thought you had everything when you started. Keep that in mind. So I think it's better to kind of tear it down and see what you need and go get it, instead of getting everything you think you need and then still having to go get stuff anyways, yada yada. But this rant is mainly about shift kits in the aspect that I still have weird shifting problems. And it's not surprising to me now because there's 300,000 miles on my valve body. It's not shocking that I have weird shifts happening. And it's not slip related, like all the clutches and discs and all the drums went in there just fine. It's just valve body problems I'm having now. And this is after installing the shift kit. And so my main gripe with the shift kit is that it costs a lot, but you don't actually get a refresh. Like they kind of sell it as like fix the problems with your valve body thing. And it makes you think you're getting a refresh, but you're not. You replace like 2 valves maybe and like 5 springs. And your valve body probably has like 30 valves in it and like hundreds of springs. And so to replace just those couple thinking you're going to like get everything back is absurd. And I guess that's kind of what I thought, because that's what it says on the box. Doesn't happen like that. So I still have a few weird shifting problems, and I was kind of just starting to work through it. I was reading how each shift works and where each valve is and all this. And I came with a list of like 5 valves I probably have to look at to fix the shift problems I'm having. And then I realized that basically getting those 5 random valves is like nearly impossible, but you can buy an entire refurbished valve body, complete, pressure tested, certified, 1-year warranty for $119 online. That's it. And my shift kit cost $200 online and didn't fix anything. So I feel like if you're having shifting problems, don't start with a shift kit. Start with a new or refurbished valve body, which will actually address the fact that you have 30 valves that need looked at, not 2. Shift kits address like 2 to 3 valves. Then, if you want different shifting performance, look at shift kits. But for instance, with my Fairbanks, I'm not super stoked on it. The Fairbanks it had 3 levels of like tunes you could do with the kit you were provided, like a toe, Weekend Warrior, and like a full competition. And it doesn't really say it, but all that means is the shift firmness increases at each level. And shift firmness, all that really means is shift time. It's how much time does it take your clutches to smack together to change gears. So I went with the toe haul because I'm not actually looking to have my clutches violently engage. But then I just so happened to put in the like level 2-3 shift accumulator just per chance, because it looked pretty. It's like this gorgeous billet accumulator with these nice sealing rings. I was like, oh yeah, let's just put that in, it'll be fine. And now my 2-3 shift is the only one that does this, and it's lightning fast and clunks like a total bitch. 1, 2, 2, 3. It's so bad. It's so bad. So, kind of in light of that, the fact that I have the cross section of shifts is funny, because I have both a like Weekend Warrior style shift and a toe haul shift in my full range of shifting. And for the average person, you just don't need faster shifting. It's not real. Like, it's not a real problem, I don't think. Like, having a stock valve body setup, aside from maybe fixing a couple like usual mechanical problems with it, they don't need much. They work really good the way the manufacturer makes them. So when you install like the Weekend Warrior competition style shift kits, it actually makes your vehicle in a daily capacity drive like total dog shit. And kind of the thought behind in like decreasing your shift time anyways is like kind of mostly a high horsepower thing and like a towing thing. Not even towing, really just high horsepower racing, because if, let's say your engine makes 1,000 horsepower, which this one makes like 250 on a good day. Let's say your engine makes 1,000, then by making your shift faster, you're giving your transmission less of a chance for those clutches to slip and burn when getting hit with 1,000 horsepower in the face. And that makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. You will burn up a transmission with slow shifting if you're putting a crap load of power to it. The clutches just won't stick together if they're going slowly. But in this vehicle that makes maybe 250 horsepower, probably not even, you don't need it. There's not too much horsepower. All it results in is this really uncomfortable and somewhat violent shift going from 2 to 3rd gear. And it might even be worse in a sense that, like, if in a competition, like, you're worried about blowing up your transmission with horsepower, but since I just daily this thing, it might actually blow up my transmission sooner if I'm having violent shifts that are, like, abruptly changing how fast all the components are moving every day over something that smoothly engages stuff. Smooth is always good for longevity, assuming you're not putting tons of power through it. You want smooth for sure. So, I guess kind of my post findings from doing all this kind of real life research of just throwing things in my transmission and trying them out is that, like, a shift kit for the most part is a waste of money. If you're having shifting problems, don't try to fix it with a kit that gives you 3 valves out of 30. Replace your entire valve body with something that's been inspected and pressure tested and checked. And then if you want to tweak and have, like, firmer shifts or something slightly better, get a cheap shift kit. They're all the same anyways. I mean, they're all different actually, but hypothetically, you're getting like the same 5 springs out of it. You shouldn't spend $200 on it. You should spend the minimum. I think Transgo makes a kit for the 4R75W that's like $80. I would totally do that one next time instead of the stupid $200 Fairbanks kit that I barely need and basically don't need. I think the stock shifting might have been better than the Fairbanks. Like, really quite disappointed with that. So, these are kind of notes to you if you were considering, modifying your transmission, either your torque converter, your valve body, you're kind of playing with those aspects. I strongly encourage you to weigh what you get out of it, which I hope I kind of nicely laid out for you, against what you actually need and how you drive your car. If you have a track truck or car and you launch it hard and you need crisp shifts because you're making big power and you have a fat turbo under the hood, great. High stall torque converter, shift kit for sure. If you just have like an old car with a ton of miles on it and you are trying to get the most longevity out of it that you can, you're rebuilding it, you want it to be tough, you want it to work nicely, go with the same stall torque converter because it's a daily and just replace your valve body entirely instead of fiddling around with a shift kit, and you'll get the nicest combination of new things back in your transmission that you need and that will serve you well. So we're going to go for a drive now to illustrate all my rant points. And mainly what you're going to see is how the torque converter stalls and how it acts when it's not quite stalled yet, like that sponginess I've been talking about. And then you also might be able to hear what a high performance shift feels like and or sounds like when you're not going that fast, because my 2-3 shift accumulator is just a billet thing with no springs behind it. And so my 2-3 shift is very abrupt and clunks. So hopefully you can hear the clunk, and that'll kind of illustrate what normal shifts look like and what a fast shift looks like, and also illustrate what a higher stall torque converter looks like in daily driving. So I focused the camera on my RPM and speed. What you really want to pay attention to is the RPM needle more than anything. Speed is just kind of let you know what's relatively happening. And so right now, car is a little bit cold. It idled high. It's idling down. Patita. So nothing's different when you're in park. Now we're in drive, and we're pulling away from a parking spot. So I'm just feathering it. You can see we're moving. We're not moving real fast, and if I kind of like punch it a teeny bit, nothing much happens. Now, to illustrate a different point, we're in drive. I'm going to hold the brake just to show you. I'm holding the brake, and now I'm going to hit the gas. So that's about where it stalls when I try to do that. Okay. Now, hopefully it shows up on camera. Let's see. So this is 1 to 2. Again, this is like feathering. We're in a neighborhood. I'm going slow. That was 2. Oh, didn't go to 3 yet. Maybe going a little faster. So see, we're still sponging. We're still not even, it's not locked yet. That right there. Probably not going to pick up on camera, but kind of like a clunk, glunk, whatever you want to say. That is the fast shift. And you can't even notice it on the RPM gauge. And the reason you won't notice it is because my torque converter is still in that spongy zone. So what the transmission is doing isn't fully coupled to what the engine is doing, and this is engine RPM, not transmission RPM. But if we had a transmission RPM gauge, here I'm going to pull out fast, just illustrating. There you go. Now we're fully engaged. About 2400 RPM is where it fully engages. And that shift, though, is more what I want to focus on. That shift is really fast. So if you had a transmission RPM gauge, you would see the fact that the output shaft actually like very abruptly changes speed, even though the engine RPM doesn't abruptly change speed. Oh wow, it's pretty out right now. And right here, I'm just cruising. This is like the whole around town feathering it kind of thing that I do. And again, if I give it more gas, that jump right there, that is not a downshift. That is all torque converter. So I could be anywhere from like here to down here while coasting to then like back up here while not coasting. And it's that variance that is super unproductive in daily driving. It makes my vehicle feel unresponsive because it doesn't fully engage with the engine RPM while I'm trying to do certain maneuvers. And then it also hurts my gas mileage because we're in this like squishy feathering zone where nothing is really happening. It's not great. We won't really get a whole lot out of me doing more test drive than this. Just again, this is a launch, kind of. You can see it definitely makes it faster. And there's that shift. And we're gonna get stuck behind this bus. But you get the idea. That's exactly how a high stall torque converter shows up in everyday life. It stalls, mine stalls around 2500 and everything else is mush. And you can check where your stalls by pulling out quickly and looking at where your needle first sits, and that'll tell you your stall speed. Hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you find it helpful for your own transmission decisions. And more than anything, have fun out there screwing around with your car. Cheers.